for today. So Father, we thank you for this time. Thank you for the opportunity that we have to be gathered with you as, again, your children and your family of faith, your congregation. We ask for your continual guidance and blessings and peace and just assurances of your presence in our life, your will in our lives, for us to trust and accept your will and seek that peace that passes all understanding by just taking ourselves away from that moment in our thoughts and our emotions and our experiences that can dissuade us and discourage us or just consume us, good or bad. It's never good when they consume us with things of this world and take us away from our time with you. The truth of what goes beyond this physical realm and the spiritual, and reminding us that we're spiritual beings passing through this physical world. We thank you so much for all you continue to provide, just being our Father, our Savior, our God, our Creator, lover of our souls, and continuing to show us, not just through the birth, life, death, crucifixion, resurrection of who you are, but the continual edification that you give us and the understanding of your word. We thank you from the prophets of old, to the priests, to the kings, to the peoples, to the apostles, to us now. These great methods.
I left home earlier than usual, and I'll tell you why.
I'm praying, sorry. So I would just pray that we just continue to ask you to help us, to continue to be in your will and continue to see your love and peace in our life. And be with us now as we study into the scripture, into the book of Genesis and the beginnings, and allow us to see and hope and joy in what's out ahead. We thank you and ask all this as you are our pastor, our teacher, our guide, our shepherd, and we ask all this in Jesus, Yeshua's name. Amen. That was odd. Sorry. She didn't know, but anyway. All right. So in reference to our study for today, as you can see, there's no board behind me. It's already moved upstairs, and if you chimed in a little late, just to remind you, this will be our last meeting in this location. We're going to be upstairs as of next week. So with that being in mind, our lesson for today without a board is going to be going through some reflections of the Genesis gems that we're going to look at in reference to Scripture and some takeaways from that process. So in reference to that, I also want to take a little glimpse into our beginnings as well, to remind us of how far God has brought us. Not to spend a lot of time on our beginnings, I want to spend the majority, obviously, of our time on Scripture. So our beginnings are in reference to 2003. We began with the most auspicious beginnings because there was a lot of disunity, disharmony, fractures, and divisions. That's just putting it mildly. There was breaks upon breaks upon breaks of groups that left. We used to be located right about 50 feet to the right of where I'm standing, which is ironic that we are here now. And then, after about a year of that, we went upstairs in this location we're in now, but an upstairs location. And then we were up there for a while until all of a sudden we then, a year later, went into another location far away, roughly about far away, about maybe 7 miles away. And we were tucked away in an office building, not on the main drag, not in a visible area, what I call like a caves of Adullam type of thing. Just tucked away, and was there for 2004 to 2008, in which we had, for all that time, from 2003, starting off with divisiveness and fractures and divisions and inauspicious beginnings. Then we had this aspect of how it was theology driven and detail driven, and no sensitivity to the spirit of care and compassion for other people, or just the intrinsic value of what God's word would have to say for us and to us, instead of just some exegesis was being missed. And so we had that as our past, and it was just a different situation. And in 2009, then the leadership changed, and I became the only person who would then be given that stewardship and responsibility from God to not only do the Bible study time we used to have broken up between sermon time, and now it's just a 2-hour together time. That began a different genre of journey with us, that God began to convict and show and enlighten different aspects of details in the Scripture and the Word of God, beyond just the theology of what was told, what we call kingdom belief, into more details and more expounding, more just opening up of things. The biggest thing was the 2 tiers of growth and the days out ahead and the marriage feast and the different salvations and inheritances. All that became more real for us. And then in 2015, we moved from that location to back over there again before it was just demolished and leveled, and now it's a gas station there. And we went over here, and now we're here in this building, this exact location from 2018. We've been here, and now we're going to be upstairs next week. I made a comment to my brother. I said, yeah, we're going to be going up next week, is preparing to go up. And he said, he goes, well, you said that, pretty cool, because it's like going up to heaven. I meant going upstairs. So it's pretty cool. So anyway, that's where we are. And so it just reminded me, since our beginnings will start again with a new, fresh location once again, we're going to be, because again, we've moved, we've been in 1, 2, 3, 4, this is our 5th location we'll be in, and this will mark the 5th location that will then allow us to be, you know, who we are in the sense of Precious Faith Bible Church, God's number for grace. Not to forget, when we moved here in 2015, that's when we became Precious Faith Bible Church. Before, we were under the unofficial name of Precious Faith Baptist Church, and then we became Precious Faith Bible Church since 2015. So with that being said, we were then officially documented as such and all of that. So with that being said, I thought it was an interesting worldly human thing to look at our past, then look at the Genesis past. Look at the Genesis of, not Genesis in a word, but in the actual book of the Bible. So I want to remind us first off, in the book of Genesis, I want to just go through these Genesis gems and remember the takeaways that are so huge and so key. And I'm not going to sit here and do this is more of I remember like a J. Vernon McGee. He used to call it a walk through the Bible. He used to go on the radio, and if you know him, if you're old enough, remember that. And he has books written like that. So this is a study of a walk through the Scripture for someone who might say, okay, I want to understand again, like, you know, what makes y'all different again, and how's this different again, and where should I start reading my Bible, and what is it different that I'm supposed to understand when I'm reading this, and why is that important anyway, right? It all starts with Genesis. No pun intended, but it's the word Genesis is the beginning, and so it is the Genesis of the understanding of the mysteries and secrets comes from the book of Genesis. And so it's important to remember, first and foremost, when I say that book, I say that name as a book of the Bible, the first thing that might come to your mind is creation, or Garden of Eden, or the man and woman, or Noah, or Moses, one of the characters. But what you probably, if I say Moses, it's because he wasn't in the book of Genesis, but he wrote the book of Genesis. So let's remember how that is interesting, because God gave that to Moses to write around 3,600 years after the beginnings of these events. So Moses had a unique perspective, because 3,600 years of human history had transpired roughly, and now he's writing about these events by God's inspiration, revelation to him. Imagine being him. We talk about Ezekiel and Jeremiah and John and Paul seeing heavenly things, future things. But you talk about Moses. Talk about a guy who's taken back in time to see the eternity past. Wow, how it all began. And it's really pretty cool. You think about that God used him, and now it kind of speaks some real relevance to that statement that no greater prophet as a sinner is there ever been than Moses. And so you kind of can see why, because God foretold to him things that no one would know, no man would know. So people say, what's the purpose of life? What's the origin of life? Moses was told that. Yes?
Lainey said this is unreal.
Yeah. So when you think about that, you think of Moses being given this information. So let's start with the beginnings of Genesis 1 and just kind of get some Genesis gems of gleanings and the importance of the issues here in line. So the first thing about Genesis chapter 1, people think of, oh, it's a creation account. That's where you're wrong. No offense, but that's incorrect. It's a creation account and a restoration account. That right there is a demarcation from normal churchianity. But there are some people, there's quite a few, in Christianity that understand that. Doesn't mean they understand kingdom and mysteries, but they do understand that. People call it a gap theory. It's actually a gap fact, and that's because of the word hayah. It's a moving verb when the world became void. In Isaiah 45, God mentioned that he did not make it void. It became that way. It's a moving verb. And so we know that there's a creation account with a restoration account in Genesis. Why is that important to see? You say, oh, it's a big deal anyways. Well, because it speaks to the fact that the world itself, the creation itself, is more than 5,000 years old. Man's existence was from, by the way, it's an interesting point here to make, because people start with Genesis and they get to where we are today, and they say there's been 6,000 years that has gone by, hence we use the term day 7 to represent the Messianic reign, meaning that every 1,000 years on earth is a day in heaven, and since there's been 6,000 years here on earth, then the 1,000th year out ahead, the 7,000th year, will be the day of the Messiah, which will be his one day in heaven equivalent to 1,000 years here, right? So we say day 7. However, in Genesis, it starts off with 5,000 BC. And you may go, wait, what? That makes that makes that all messed up. No, because even though that's the accurate historical, we count from when the first man died, from death reigned in Adam, when he died in 930 years after, so in 4070 BC, when he died, we count from that point forward. So while that 70-year gap of not making it even 1,000 kind of speaks to that 75-day gap of Armageddon into the Messianic reign, when he goes from judge to then king ruling on his throne in Jerusalem. But we don't change the nomenclature of day 7, even though we know there's been 5,000 years that will have expired in the old and then 2,000 in the new of man's existence before we then get to the Messianic reign. So that's why it's important to understand creation and restoration, because not only is it understanding of the fact that there's a lot more hidden than we can see. So why is it important? Because God's principle of a template is in view. He's telling us in the very beginning, things are hidden that you don't see in plain sight. I didn't write the book, right? But in plain sight, he says he created, and then he later on tells us in Isaiah, he didn't create it to be void, and he tells you it became void. So in plain sight, he hides a truth right in front of you. Something happened. Then he goes on to talk about a restoration account, which everybody else in churchianity talks about it being a creation account, but that's not what he says. He says it's a restoration account. He only mentions the word create after he starts restoring only 2 times, about the great fish and about created man, which is not us, but the angelic hosts. That's another thing we're going to get to later. Also in Genesis 1, some of the gleanings that we can have in Genesis 1 is that you have these 3 days. The first 3 days are not earmarked as 24-hour days. Even though in retrospect we see them as such, it's earmarked as 3 separated from 4, because on day 4 he made the sun and the moon and the stars, and we measure a 24-hour day by the revolution of the earth around the sun, right? So we measure that by the earth's rotation, and then the 365 day, or year I should say, right? So the year is us around the sun, and our rotation is the day. But here's the thing, none of that was the same back in the day. The flood that happened in Genesis 1, we see that there's a different flood than the flood later on with Noah. We see that from 2 Peter 3. We also see that then the Lord changed the shape of the earth from Genesis 1 to Genesis 9 when he restored it. There is a distinctive difference, huge difference. The earth was not like it is now in a round global sphere. It was more of a dome-like situation when he had first flooded it up, and then he restores it, but then he changes its shape. When he raises the mountains, he births them into place, as Moses says in Psalm 90. So when we see all of this, and he asks where the waters would then take their place. But we see that, but the first 3 days, why are the first 3 days not earmarked with the sun and moon and stars? Why would God do that? Again, a hidden gem right in front of you. God's basically telling you day 7, day 8, and day 9 are in view, because the first shall be last, right? Those are the first days mentioned, but they're the last days that we're going to experience in our timeline as humans, aren't we? We're going to experience day 7, the Messianic reign, the day of the Lord. We're going to experience day 8, the day of God, when he's going to have the New Jerusalem sit on the earth. We're going to experience day 9, the sin cloth pour out, when all things are celebrated as being fulfilled and completed. And then we have the ages of the ages. But those 3 days are 1,000 years each. And so we look back at how those first 3 days in Genesis, coincidentally, there was not a sun and a moon and stars. So there was no traditional 24-hour period like we would see it today, which leads us to the understanding of the hidden mysteries and secrets of God's giving the template there, which also spoke later on, coincidentally, that God gave 7 promises to Abraham. 4 were covenants, 3 were testaments, which is a covenant shed with blood. And so we see that in Genesis chapter 1, those first 3 days were more important than the latter 4 days, because they speak to the days out ahead when God's going to reveal his completion of his fulfillment of his things that are deifying and glorifying him. The other 4 days focus on what he's giving to us as man. He's giving us all those things that come to life and that are sustaining for our ability to enjoy this creation, as we call it. So also we see in Genesis chapter 1 that there's a made man and a created man. That angelic hosts have fallen twice, because they fell once in Genesis 1. People don't see that. And that's the reason why there had to be a replenishing later on in Genesis 1. The first fall of angels was the fall that came from the Ezekiel 28 and the Isaiah 14 account of the anointed cherub that covereth, when he made merchandise of people. Not people, celestial beings, angelic hosts. And so he then took all of them down and they went to Tartarus. That's the first fall. That 2 Peter talks about in chapter 2. They went to Tartarus. There's 2 falls of angels, but yet churchianity misses this. So why do I bring up, what am I saying so far? Look at all these gems that are blindly not even talked about in common churchianity. The only one that even comes close is they understand about the gap of what God created, then was destroyed and God restored. Okay, they do see that. Some people see that. But I don't know very many that speak of the other things we've been talking about. Then we get to the created man and made man. Why is that important? Again, because the created man was meant to replenish the celestial beings, replenish the heavenly host, because all of the minions, not the seraphim, not the cherubim, not the 24 elders, not the 4 living ones, the angelos, the messengers, the soldiers, they were all taken down by Satan, making merchandise of them. The rank and file folks. And then God replenishes that in the book of Genesis in chapter 1. And that's why in chapter 2 it says, and everything that was created and made he rested from, in chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And all the hosts of heaven were also settled. And so you have this name for the Lord that we say, Yahweh Sabaoth, which means Lord of hosts. And it does mean celestial, as the stars of heavens, but it also means celestial as in the angelic beings, because we know this by the usage of the verb, as the phrasing Lord Sabaoth, and how it's used to denote him coming with his angelic hosts behind him. We also see it as reference to his placement of the stars in the heavens. Both are true. But apparently people want to make it one or the other. They're both true. Just like when David said in Psalm 100, we think David said, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at thy right hand. Many folks who don't believe Jesus is Yeshua is God the Son have a hard time with that verse. The Lord said to my Lord. Right? It's 2 Lords, God the Father, God the Son. So when we get to this point of understanding of Genesis in chapter 1, we see there's a lot there. A lot there. We also see that God, in those first 3 days, as I mentioned, I don't know the timelines for them, but they do speak in a precursor of typology of 1,000 years for each one of those days, for the 1,000 years out ahead for day 7, day 8, day 9. They also speak to the phrasing how God, more importantly, uses the term day. There's no debate over oh my gosh, the day yada could mean the 24-hour, blah, 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 blah. No, I understand that the word day is not a debate over time. It should be an understanding of how God used it. And how God used it was to define a finished work of his craftsmanship. And he called it a day. We do that sometimes in our nomenclature. We say, I'm exhausted. I spent all this time doing blah, 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 blah. Boy, it's been a day. I went through such and such to get to this point. The traffic was horrendous. You wouldn't believe what happened this morning. It was a day, right? So we say that phrasing. But God uses that phrasing to say, look, when I'm done with my craftsmanship of what I intend to have completed within my line of thinking and that line of thought, when he's done with that particular thing, he calls it a day. It's like he's created a artist's work and he signed it. And he's like, no, that piece of artwork is done. It's on the mantle. It's on the wall, I should say. It's over. Next, he goes to the next one. So he calls it a day when it's a finish. So I look at that, we talked about that before, as because of understanding how God used the word day, not as 24 hours, not as a time period. No, he didn't use it as a time period at all. We do that. God used it as a definition of a recognition of the completed work of a craftsmanship of his artistry as the creator God. And who are you to say otherwise? So get off your high horse with talking about this timeline and that timeline of what the word yada means. Just stop it. It's just so ignorant. God did not use it as a time issue. He used it as a completion of work of an artist who can do whatever he wants. He can call his artwork whatever he wants. He made it. He called it a day. It's finished work. It's called a day. Okay, I got it. Makes a lot of sense. The day of the Lord and the day of God are completed works. Right? Makes sense to me too. He's not inconsistent. He's very consistent with that usage of that word. In the day of our judgment. That's a completed. He's going to have our judgment be brought unto us. We all appear for judgment to be judged once, right? Right there. And so, once for all. And so we get to this point of understanding that the word day we talked before about, the loaded meaning and that, the application to knowing, well, why is all that important? Because if you don't see the template of understanding that God has created, destruction of his creation then destroys, he then moves on his own, not unabated, unsolicited, on his own, he moves, and then he restores. If you don't see that pattern, which many people see, then you're going to miss other things. But then other people see that, but they don't see kingdom things. Or some people do see that and do see kingdom things, or mysteries and secrets. But the more the mysteries and secrets is the other things we already mentioned. They don't see the other things we just mentioned. Because now all of a sudden, if you understood the template of that, then you understood also there's multi-layers of details that matter. There's multi-layers. As soon as God enters that statement from Moses, write this, and Moses is writing this, I'm sure he must have been thinking, what'd you just say? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then the earth became void. Okay, what? What happened? I wonder if in the white space, if there was a pause, and Moses said, Lord, what happened? You know? I wonder, because we see the finished work of what God told him to pen and writing, right? How do we know if he didn't pause and ask that question and say, that's interesting, I'm curious, what happened? You know, I just think it's really interesting that people think that he just wrote and didn't think about what he was writing. Of course he did. Of course he did. That's why you see some of the personality and some of the tendencies of the writer come out on the pages that we see, so that would engage the collaborative process of human beings that God chooses to do, does not need to do. And so remember that God used men to write the Bible. Men did not write the Bible from a standpoint of the direct penmanship. They were directed, just like a car is the vehicle that you use to get from A to B. The mankind was the vehicle that God used to transmit his words onto paper. It was not men that wrote it. God wrote the bad boy. He's the only author there is. He used their hands and their pens, or their pencils, stylus, whatever you want to call them, and the papyrus to record that. So when you get to this process of Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2 opens up with a whole new level of understanding too. That we see that not only did God rest from what he created and made, again, if you don't see this template, then you're going to miss the multi-layer of details that ensues. There's so much pregnant of meaning in all of Genesis. It lays the foundation for understanding secrets and mysteries. Genesis 2, he says that God's Spirit, his Ruach, breathed into the flesh that he forges into a body. There's his spirit, there's our body lifeless, and he went, we became a living nephesh, a living soul. So we see right there the spirit, the soul, the body, that God's Spirit made our soul come alive. We see that Ha-Adam, not the name, his name wasn't Adam, we say that, but his name is man. The man and the woman who was later called Eve, they were of flesh and bone and no blood, akin to Jesus, Yeshua, when he rose from the dead, and he said, you see that I'm not a ghost, I have flesh and bone. No, touch me. But he had no blood. Why? He was animated by the Spirit. How do we know they were animated by the Spirit? Because they had the Shekinah glory of God upon them. And when you sin, not only does that leave, then blood enters in. And when blood enters in, death will ensue. The same reason why when Yeshua came to this earth and that blood that was sitting in the heavens then was infused into his body, God the Son no longer was with the Shekinah glory outwardly emanating. He veiled that in his body of flesh and blood and bone. He gave a glimpse of that at Transfiguration, and they were like, oh my goodness gracious, that's crazy. He's like, yeah, that's who I really, that's what's going on inside here. Yeah, I'm just veiling this from you. So the reality is that we don't see that in church Christianity being taught that, wow, so they had all their organs and all of their body parts in place, but they were being animated by spirit. Just like when Christ rose from the dead, and he says, oh, okay, let's have some fish, let's eat. Huh? No blood, and he eats. What? He eats fish and has some bread. What? So for those who go, that's ridiculous. Hey, that sounds ridiculous, right? But Christ did it. He ate food, bread and fish, and didn't even worry about anything about your commentary or mine about that's not possible without blood to digest it. And why would you need food? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you think. He was flesh and bone, no blood, animated by spirit, just like they were in the Garden of Eden prior to sin. And so what happened with the sin? We know the tree of life is noted as Yeshua, Jesus. We know the tree of God, the knowledge of good and evil, is Satan. We know there's a garden of God, a very massive, and then in a garden of God was the garden of God, typifying the actual courtyard, and then the inner courtyard, then within the inner courtyard there's the actual establishment of the holy place and the Holy of Holies, which was typified by where the man and woman were, and why Satan used the serpent as his crafty way to get her to come out of there, so that he could then be on the outer courtyard, because he can't allow himself in because he's an unsanctified celestial, stained with sin. He can't go in. There's no sacrifice provided for him. A typology of that way before he told that to Moses was pictured in Genesis. But again, Christianity misses this. Other people in kingdom things don't see this. But it's all true. It's all there for you to see. So what the other trees represent, we see the parallel of Ezekiel 31 represents it was a garden of God as in the heavens as it is on earth, and the other trees were metaphors of the other angelic hosts all around. And this is where the other third of the angels, the other fall, which is the third. The first fall was in Genesis 1, cited in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14, where they fell with him, all those minions. And then later on we see then from Genesis in chapter 3 through chapter 6, that there's a third of the replenished created man that he mentioned in chapter 1. Now a third of them fall as well. And they are in Jude mentioned as going after strange flesh. So the first fall was because they went into the iniquitous thought of the making merchandise that they too could join a coup with Satan. The second group did not do that. The second group said, hey, I'm doing that, granted, but what they were charged with was going after strange flesh, which is the word heterox flesh. Angelic hosts had flesh. That's what Jude says. I didn't write the book. It's in Jude. Read it, verses 5 to 8. They went after strange flesh, he says, and then they took in Genesis 6, daughters of men, which means by force, as in violence, as in rape. So we know that in retrospect, when God said, I'll put enmity between your seed and her seed, Cain's line, which was the beginning of a hybrid, unholy offspring. Satan had laid and had relations with Eve to soil her womb. People say, my gosh, that's ridiculous. Why would you even say that? Hey, look, man, I didn't write the book, okay? When you read Genesis chapter 3 and you read Ezekiel 31, you can't come away with any other conclusion. It is what it is. I didn't write it. It's not a demoralization of women, by no means. It actually tells you about how the woman was a higher superior. She was actually not formed in fashion like man. She was sculpted and built like the ecclesia, like the called out ones. Oh. She was more superior made. She was more spiritually astute than a man was intended to be in a pre-sin world. Post-sin world, part of her consequences is now be subjected to that man over her. Not because she's a lesser person. By no means. We're equal. But if you were to be fair, in a pre-sin world, she was made superior. That's just the facts. It's the facts. And that's why there's this issue with people having, through the years of our history of the world and our country and everything, women have been, unfortunately, mistreated. And it's because of the consequence of sin. Not because they deserve it or men are a bunch of boneheads. No, it's because that's both not true. It's just because we're all boneheads. We're all sinners that just have a consequence upon us, and we experience differently. And Jesus made the comment, God said in Genesis 3, that one part of her desire would be to rule over him, meaning she would know that she's superior, but she can't do that. Well, I didn't write that. The Lord said your desire would be to rule over him. Why is that? Because you're going to know by the date, it's going to be hard to be frustrated, by the way, because your innate and internals are going to have a communication with me that they don't have. I mean, in other words, God does not have a life factory inside of us. Nope, but he does in a woman. He can touch inside their womb and form a life. That's a kind of a big deal. Just saying. That's a big deal. It's kind of like saying, oh, I'm an angel. Are you a seraphim in the throne room? A little different, right? So if you're able to have God's hand touching inside of you and forming life, whether you have life or not inside you, that you can have that happen shows the uniqueness of your connection to God is uniquely different and established from men. Different. Way different. And so that's why her desire was to say, innately, I had this innate action to want to always maybe say something, but they have to be subjected to this consequence of sin of the man. Yes?
I'm just curious why 2/3 of that second set of angels didn't do that, just a third.
I don't know. Whether 2/3 didn't do it, or who knows why they didn't do it.
I mean, because the first set of angels, that infantry group all went with Satan, but apparently 2/3 had some kind of ability not to succumb to him.
And maybe it's because of the fact, the only difference is that, but the big difference is that the first fall came in the heavenlies to the earth. The second fall was they were overseeing the earth. So they weren't like, the first fall was apart from earth. They weren't discussing earth per se. They were all in the heavenlies, and then they were consigned to earth as a result of that. Whereas the second fall, they were already replenished here on the earth. So maybe the perspective of that first fall caused the other 2/3 to learn. Like, I'm not doing that. I saw what happened last time. That's not good. So I don't know.
I mean, how would they know about the first fall? Because they were created after the first fall.
They wouldn't, from just being told, probably. Being told.
By the elders and the seraphim.
Yeah. Because just like God told Moses, he didn't know, he wasn't there. God told Moses, possibly other angels, the other hosts, seraphim, and so forth, told them maybe. I don't know. That's a good point you're making. I don't know. That's my only guess. But in Genesis 3, as we continue on, we see, yes.
Lainey said, how do angels communicate with each other? Satan spoke to the first ones and also spoke to Eve.
Yep. Well, they communicate with each other. We don't know how they replenish, by the way. I don't know how they procreated, because they don't procreate like human beings, that's for sure. But they're different. But at the same time, they can appear as humans and therefore take on the physical form. We've seen that happen in Scripture. So, but the reality is, how do they communicate with each other? I mean, we want to say by verbal because that's our knee-jerk reaction, but who knows if it's just like a telekinesis type of thing, just in thought. They don't have to speak. We're the ones who speak because that's how we are made, different from the animal kingdom, that animals used to be able to speak, which is why the serpent was called more subtle or more cunning, more establishing of his reasoning, which is the Hebrew word means. He was more rationalizing and reasoning in his oration to Eve. She never once freaked out that he was talking. It was just how he was talking that she picked up on. So since speech was a issue between man and beast that was initially pre-sin established, that was able to be seen, you would think that there's a distinction between the two of us, that we are the superior over the animal kingdom, and they were even possessed by Satan. The serpent started to speak these ways. But the reality is that this is the same thing with I think the celestial versus the physical, that they don't have to have verbal communication to be communicated. So the communication could have been in other ways. I mean, I know that in farm life, and Babe's side of the family, for example, and you'll probably testify to this, you all up there in the Midwest, but a lot of farmers have a lot of things they say without saying a word. Just their body language and just their facial expressions, just their intimation of what they don't do, what they don't say. You just know. It's like, it's weird. I never understood that until I was around that community, and you get that. I mean, I get it. So that's just humans doing that. So I don't know how they communicated, but it would not shock me at all if it was nonverbal.
Well, remember how Phil Keller had all the signals and stuff with the sheepdog? He didn't do a
Yeah.
lot of verbal with the sheepdog.
Right, right, it wasn't, that's right, and that's another agricultural example of how the farmers and the sheepdog don't communicate with a lot of verbal, it's just motions and behaviors. And so, yeah, I mean, who knows, right? And so this is why, interesting enough, to your point, the earliest language we know is Akkadian, and there's no way of us knowing until we get to Abram that the Hebraic language was brought into view. Other than that, we don't know what they spoke. We call it the language of the birds, meaning it's a heavenly language, because no one knows what they spoke from the Garden of Eden to Noah. And if you say you do, stop lying. None of us know. We don't know. We can guess. We can guess. We don't know what they spoke, what language they spoke. But God brought in the Hebrew language through Abram, who he made a Hebrew, which means it wasn't Hebrew, because he brought that out of nothing. So you're like, okay, what they speak then? I don't know. I don't know what they spoke. But I know the first established language prior to Abram being called a Hebrew was he was speaking Akkadian, apparently, from the Chaldees, potentially, among other peoples doing that similar thing. But we know a lot of languages were established post-Babel, right? But before that, we don't know, right? So the other aspect we have here in Genesis, going back, is that then you have Cain again. What does it mean by his seed? His seed is the hybrid, unholy offspring of Satan and Eve. So now he has an unholy union. It's not the way it was intended to be. A celestial with an earthling. No. Nope. And so what does Cain's line begin to then continue to propagate? The same thing. In Genesis 4, that's why Naamah comes out of that line, and Naamah becomes one of the cities of Canaan, which again was noted as the giants in the land and the promised land where God gave his people to conquer. That's not a coincidence. You say, what's the big deal? Why would that have a relevance, since there's between that Cain's lineage of Naamah, and then you got the promised land, and Naamah's mentioned as a city. What about the Noah's flood in between? Didn't God eliminate all the giants? That was one of the intentions of doing that. But Naamah married Ham. So she was one flesh with him on the ark, as a type of the wheat and tares. So we see that just like Satan sowed the wheat and tares, the wheat and the darnel, like he does at the end of Armageddon into the Messianic reign, he's going to do the same thing in the typology. Later on, it's going to come to fruition in that sense of it, prophetically. But early on, we see the vignette of this and how he did the same thing on the ark of Noah's ark. He said, well, you can't do away with Naamah. Noah is aware, as a righteous man, you can't just separate one flesh. He's not happy about the union, the unholy union that his son has with this Naamah, who, by the way, is strong, brilliant, and beautiful. He's got no shot against that. No man has a shot against that. You got beauty, strength, and you got wisdom and knowledge beyond compare. You're a dead man walking. So she just used him, and he was already weak at the knees. So you have this aspect of how these things are not looked at, not talked about in churchianity at all. But let's go back to Cain, though, and again, by his seed. What's it mean then? It means that Cain's seed was a proliferation throughout the years, up into Noah's ark, of a hybrid offspring, in which God eliminated, except for the progeny that was to come in the seed of Naamah, which would then get with Ham, and then from there had Nimrod, who was called a Rephaim, the same word used in Genesis 6 about the giants in the land. I didn't write the book. And it said also in Josephus' writings that Shem, if you remember, killed Nimrod, which you can see why Noah earlier would say, blessed be the God of Shem, and then we find later on that's what happened with him, which we find also in his lineage is the production of the genealogy of Melchizedek, that he was from the gene pool of Shem, who was, from a cultural Jewish history standpoint, believed that he's the one who eliminated Nimrod, the first of the big progeny that continued this seed of Cain in a post-flood world. Not good. And that's why his seed and her seed, meaning the seed of the man and woman versus the seed of Satan and the woman. Not good, right? But why did God then, go back to why did God not kill Cain? Did we know also when the people in the churchianity realize that Cain premeditated to kill Abel? Nope, they don't realize that. Because in the Septuagint it tells you that. He premeditated it. Why is that important to know? Because the Jewish people speak to the same typology. They premeditated to kill Jesus, Yeshua. It wasn't a spontaneous thought. They premeditated it. And how did Cain kill his brother again? With the knife that he used to sacrifice the lamb. How do I know that? Because 1 John says it was a sacrificial slaughter. That's how I know that. How did the Jews kill Jesus? On the sacrificial day of their Paschal lamb. Unbelievable. And with the instrument of death that the Romans used to prosecute. Sounds a lot like what Cain did. Oh, and they did it openly, like they didn't hide themselves like in the backwoods somewhere. Openly in the field, Cain killed Abel. Openly in the Via Dolorosa down to the Golgotha, he was just murdered. Before that, purged beyond belief by Pilate. You know, so there's not a coincidence to this, right? But some people see some of that, they don't see all of that, and say, well, what was the coats of skin that he gave to Adam and Eve? Well, that was obviously a lamb. There's an animal for sure, but it was a lamb. We find out later on because he brings up the lamb as a sacrifice to cover our sins. But then you go forward again, you say, well then, wait a minute, Abel was conceived first in Genesis 2 when they cleaved together. But then Cain was born first in Genesis 4, which is why his name means I got me a man from God. Because Eve thought that she was conceiving first, therefore that one would be born first. That sounds natural. Then we find out in biology that you can have two children from two different fathers, as long as their pregnancy takes place between 2 to 4 weeks apart. You can't go beyond 4 weeks, but within that time frame, 2 weeks more than normal, sometimes up to 4 weeks, you can have two fathers impregnate one woman and have them both born at the same time. Yikes. That's what happened. That's why he moved in swiftly against Eve. And so we find all this is hidden from the common people understanding of churchianity. But all these are this layers and multiple layers of truth, this speaking to us about what God is laying forth to understand. Then we go forward and we go to Enos. Enos, because you got Seth who replaced Abel. Then Enos, it says, they began to call on the name of the Lord, but actually they didn't call on him. They mocked God. That's why Enoch was preaching in Jude about those who were mockers and scoffers in his day. I didn't write the book, right? Jude says that's what Enoch was talking about. And yet we ignore the way the Hebrew word is written when it says call upon. It has an inflection to that. It wasn't a call as in a respectful call. It was a call as a mock, as a sarcasm. So in Enos' day, they mocked and scoffed God. And Enos' day, and then Enoch's day, he's pictured by those who are taken out as the faithful in that first wave of the rapture. So here you have, in the days of mocking and scoffing, there's a depth of understanding that the Lord's going to come with a myriad of angels he talks about. And yet, they turned a deaf ear to Enoch, according to Jude. But he wanted to save some through fire, and yet didn't happen, unfortunately, except for Noah, because his family of Methuselah, the Lamech, to him, passed on that righteousness. Yes?
There's another quickly, what you do quickly.
Yeah, what you do, yeah, that's right, what you do quickly. Yeah.
And then
That's right,
another,
to Jesus.
not
Judas.
Naaman, but Naaman, the man that was cured of leprosy, that
Yeah.
high official in Nineveh. Was it Nineveh or Syria? Well,
I think it was Syria.
Yeah.
Syria.
But I mean, that name just, it permeated the centuries
Yeah.
after Noah's Ark.
Yeah, and so you have, so there's so much information that some of the people know, but do they connect it with the spiritual depth of the mysteries and secrets that's applied to it? So why is that important to understand about these things regarding Cain and Abel, and why? Because, again, why did God not kill Cain? Why did God protect him? Why did God say, as a matter of fact, if you kill him, then I'll take sevenfold vengeance on you? What does that speak to? I'll tell you what it speaks to. It speaks to that Cain's line, look how loving and gracious God is. Cain's line, which is the embodiment of a hybrid unholy offspring, his very existence is a hybrid offspring. That's who he is. He's half angelic, half human. Not cool. His lineage is the same. They were eliminated from the flood, save Naaman, who then got with Ham and then procreated again with Nimrod, and here we have more giants in the land. And I'm sure everybody's going, God, I thought you said, I did, but this is a precursor of the wheat and tares, and I told you, I'm going to tell you in the future, I can't just uproot one without the other, so here we go. And that's why I want you to take him out, by the way. Later on, he's going to tell Abraham that through Moses, the same thing, and you're going to take him out. So, okay. But so why did God do that? Because it speaks to the future event that God would even have saving grace and love and consideration extended to that seed. So the seed of Cain, who was eliminated except for Naaman with Ham and then procreated Nimrod and others, then you have that seed that goes on. But it typifies two things. One, typifies that God can actually take even those who are from an unholy union and use them to be part of the one new man in Christ. You know, like Rahab the harlot, or like Ruth the Moabitess who worshiped false gods. That's insane. God's not limited by our physical, sinful depravities. He just likes to show off and even use them to facilitate a blessing, holy offspring that he came from his lineage of that being his genealogy. It's kind of crazy. But he just shows it. And also, then you see in the New Testament, it's a word picture of the second thing, which is that, in other words, there's nobody who's off the table for being unredeemed. There's no like unredeemables out there. In other words, there's no seed, there's no origination of who you are that's going to take you off the table from the opportunity to be in Christ. God has already ordained who's going to be in Christ, but there's no group of people. There's no group of people based on your origin that's excluded just by your origin. That's my point. So whether your origin is from man and woman or woman and Satan is irrelevant. What seed that you had within you. Whether you were part of the man's line carried on or some of that other line was in you from having that interaction, you're not beyond being redeemed. That's the beauty of God's love. That's why he did that. That's why he gave those things to Cain. That's why he did that. So to make it clear to us. Don't you ever question that just because he's a devil dog that he's not going to be. No. Why didn't God kill him then? Why not? And he told Noah just a few chapters later, man kills a man, take him out. And he tells Cain just the opposite. I got you. Got me? What the heck, man? That's pretty nice. You don't take my life. I took my brother's life. And yes, it was mocking. I'm a keeper. And God says, listen, we'll put you in the land of Nod, which is the place that no one knows. Even today on the map, no one knows where it's at. Right? It's just out there. And it spoke to a sign out ahead, meaning there's a user future for him. He represents those people at that lower level that, again, doesn't matter how lowly you are in your origins, you're not beyond the option that God could choose you to be in Christ. It also speaks to Paul's avenue when he said, within us is a spiritual man and a sinful fleshy man. This couldn't be more pictured than in Cain's life. He was a man of humanity and a man of celestial. He had a spiritual man and he had a fleshy man in him together. That's why God had that happen. For folks who go, why is it important anyway? It's not ridiculous, okay? It may be hard to understand and hard to absorb, but get off your horse, stop getting all angry, and calm it down and understand there's a reason and purpose why God does these things. I didn't do it. Don't get mad at me. I didn't write the book, okay? So, yes.
In a way, God addressed lonely when he said who offends in one point of the law offends in all, and of course the righteousness is filthy rags.
Yeah, that's right. You sent it, yeah. And so, and it even told Cain, and Cain's countenance was downcast, it says, and because he wanted to please God. Again, speaking to the fact that even though you have a sinful, in his case, he had a celestial, sinful origination, and his humanity, being around Adam and Eve, his mother and father, and his brother Abel, he was wanting to do what was right, but did in his own way, by getting forth the fruits. But he wanted to please God. His countenance fell, it says. It wasn't like he was just shoving his fist at God's face. That's not what happened. He's just showing you the sinful man taking over, and that's what happened in his life. But again, there's a lot of different things there we don't see because people don't want to talk about it because they just don't want to mention who Cain is. But that's the thing. By the way, in Cain's line, we also saw they were artificers of iron. But yet iron didn't come up until a good 3,000 years later in human history by the Hittites. So how is it that Genesis mentions it, but historically we don't see that being true in the timeline? Because it speaks to the celestial hybrid offspring offered intelligence and advancement that were beyond human beings, which is why even if you read anything by Steve Quayles, you'll know there is evidence out there that is being squelched by the common people that there are answers to a technology that was beyond our understanding, hence the pyramids of Egypt. They still today can't figure that out, right? Other things like the Easter Island and cities underwater off the coast of Japan or off the coast of Cuba, all these different, and they have like images under the water that forge a formation. They say, oh my gosh, that was from years ago. In the South America, the Incas, and how you go up so many high thousands of feet in the air and you see these images, you know, how they do that. Because they were more intelligent, we weren't getting smarter. Okay, stop that narrative. That's an evolutionary ape, caveman, garbage narrative. It's not true. Okay, there were celestial hybrids. Think about it. If you have half angel, half human, how could you not be brilliant? But you're pretty brilliant. Okay, I'm just saying. So that's why they had iron, because they were using that celestial insight and wisdom and intelligence to introduce to the man's world, this world, what God says no. And what was the result God said in Noah day? There was violence, man against man. Man against animal, animal against animal. That was never to be the way it was supposed to be. And yet it was. God ordained it to show the corruption of not just sin, but how sin was amplified through the celestial, offering the insight and the advancement beyond our ability to be mature enough to handle it in our sinful state. We used it to our own end, to our own means, which again speaks to how when given too much pearls before swine, when given too much too soon, when given steak or meat to a person who should have milk or pablum or bread or artos, you're going to choke them, and they're going to actually use a spiritual depth of truth in a very negative way to accomplish things that result in violence or an offense against God and others. That's the imagery of why God tells you that. So what's the application of all this anyway? All this theology. I just told you, right? This is why we have to understand these things. Yeah.
That's the thing, they say they found green glass in the Saudi Arabian desert that speaks to many millennia ago of nuclear activity, and they've also found stuff similar in the Kashmir. I heard someone on the internet talking about that, a man named John Moore. And also one other thing, God did intercede with Cain before he killed Abel.
Yeah. You say intercede. What do you mean about the sacrifice?
Well, no, he said sin crouches at the door, but you must master it.
Yeah,
But he didn't.
Yeah. So when he says this, yeah, and he's, because he was angry at the sacrifice, to your point. He sin crouches at the door, yep. And that's when he was downcast because he didn't take his offering. So yeah, God gave him, this is all, he was exposed for his disposition, and he didn't like that. I mean, no one likes, every time I hear about that story, and I remember studying it and going back at it, it always reminds me of people say, oh my gosh, he's just a jerk. You don't understand, when you want something so bad and you had something that was so important to you and you get rejected, it's like your first date, and they just tell you that you're ugly, or they tell you that they dump you on this day where everybody's looking at you. You feel downcast. That's how Cain felt, like he got dumped by God. It's the most important relationship of endearment is with God. And he just got dumped, if you will. And he was just like so demoralized, he wasn't caring what God was saying about sin crouching out the door. He was just so angry at Abel, he wanted to take him out. So you see later on with Noah's day, Noah then comes in as the only righteous one. And we know that he says, God tells him that, because you are righteous. Then we see that in the Genesis gems that it wasn't just 2 by 2 of animals, by the way. But wait a minute. Did all the human beings survive? No, just 8. Well, how about did all the animals survive? Wait. No. So who was sovereignly in charge of choosing the 8 people and then choosing the animals? So this is where our churchanity friends go, well, Noah did preach for 100 years. Well, I'm sure he did. So, hey, they all had a chance, just like our free will doctrine says, like our people in the denominations tell us. God loves everybody, and he gives everybody a chance. How about the animals? I'm just waiting. What's the response to that? Who called the animals to the ark? God. So he left off some, didn't he? Right? I mean, did that happen? Who called the animals to the ark? God or Noah? God did. So therefore, God chose which 7 and 7 of the clan. God chose which 2 by 2 of the clan. Not a man. Not animals on nothing go, well, I want to go. That's not what happened. God goes, you, not you. You, not you. Holy mackerel. If that doesn't speak to sovereignty, I don't know what does. But you want to go to this Noah thing and say he preached and therefore they all had a chance. Did they though? How about they were married and given in marriage in Noah's day, and no one wants to show pictures of people that are getting pummeled by the floodwaters on the sides of rocks, or women that are pregnant, or babies sucking on the breast, getting just life taken out of their lungs because they're drowning. Did the babies have a chance? They have free will? How about in the womb? I'm not trying to get grotesque, but stop lying to yourself. Well, Noah did preach, did the babies understand what he was saying? How about the fetus inside the womb? Because they were marriage and giving in marriage. It's the euphemism for letting you know they were engaging in relations, and there was pregnancy, and there was children by the attrition of that. It goes against the narrative of the denominationalism, doesn't it? Because it goes against what they want to believe versus God saying, look, I'm a loving God. Let's face reality here. You guys put yourself in this situation. Yeah, I'm a sovereign God, but in time and with your choices, you chose that. With your time and emotions and view in the garden, through that one man, sin entered. because that woman did what she did. He then did what he did because he wanted to not be deceived. He did it to redeem her as obedience. He was not deceived. Eve, she took of the fruit, meaning the doctrine of Satan. She touched the tree. Be clear of this. The man, Ha'adam, did not touch the tree. Make it clear enough, okay? The man did not touch the tree, which means he did not have relations with the tree. She did. She took of the fruit. His belief, what he was selling, the doctrine. Oh, you can take of this and be as God, your eyes will be open. So that's what the man did. He partook of sin, not of the tree, not a physical union. He took of his doctrine of lies, like Jesus called the Pharisees and Sadducees. That's the leaven, is their teaching. It's their lie. Beware the fruit of them, he said. Their leaven is their teaching. That was his fruit. So that's what he partook of, to effect a redemption, just like Christ, knowingly, willingly, openly. He wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a sin debt? Really? He went into it knowing all along there's going to be a sin debt for us, paying our sin debt. Was Christ deceived? No. Did Christ do it willingly? Yes. Yes. Did Christ have an emotional time with it in the Garden of Gethsemane? Yes. You think the man did too in the Garden of Eden? Yes. Yes. It wasn't something he did just whimsically. He was devastated. He saw this kind of glory of God had lost from her. She now had blood flowing in her veins. She was blood, flesh, and bone. She looked different. He's like, wait a minute. we'll have him. And he knows that God said, cleave to your wife. Till the garden, cleave to your wife. The two commands he was given, besides not eat of that tree. And so he thinks, well, I got to break a commandment here. I can't. How can I cleave to my wife when she's like this? So he partakes of the fruit to now be with her in the same union of both being in a sinful state, and the promise of God's redemption would then be in place. The same way that Christ, God the Son, put himself out there as our sin sacrifice. And he said, into your hands I commit thy spirit. He put himself in God the Father's hands to know that in that time of darkness that was on the cross, that no man will ever understand, typifying that darkness of the 11th plague of Egypt, that he was doing what the man did, a very heart-wrenching, emotional decision in Gethsemane leading up to the actual event itself. It was not pleasurable to him. It was not something that was a surprise to him. It was a premeditated, understandable act of godliness to effect the love of restoration for the one who was fallen in sin. And if you don't understand that about Christ, which is a joke if you don't, that's ridiculous, and I know you do understand that, I think you have to understand what the man did in the Garden of Eden. Okay? Just like some of our word of faith, sacrilegious, un-Christian teaching people would say, they say, oh, that Jesus was defeated by Satan and drugged into hell and all this kind of garbage and demons tortured him. It's all garbage. That's all lies. These are the same idiotic thinking that would lead you to believe that the man was some kind of a loserville, and the man who saw his wife Eve caught into sin is some kind of doofus or moron. But that's not what 2 Timothy says. He was not deceived. He was not deceived. I don't care what you think. That's what it says. That's what it says. He did what he did intentionally, on purpose, out of love, out of commitment of obedience, out of forward thinking of restoration, that I'm in the Father's hands. He'll take care of me. He always has. Again, we don't see that, right, in drama church Christianity being taught. We don't see this. So why is this all important? That the man understood how the first man looked at his relationship with his wife. Because, by the way, they left mother and father, it says in chapter 2 of Genesis. There wasn't a mother and father. Hello. So God was the first preacher, right? Given a marriage ceremony. But he gave you the idea how a woman should be cherished by a man. Regardless of how she's in her state, you cherish her by doing what God tells you to do, regardless of what you see, what you feel, what you experience. Do what God told you to do. Do what God told you to do. Do what God told you to do. But didn't God do that with Hosea and Gomer? But God, she slept with all men in the city. But God, you want me to go buy her back on the Oakman's block? Yeah, so you do that with me every day. You Israelites lift up your skirts to all these idols. You are committing whoredom and adultery against me every day. And I love and forgive you. I want you to see how it feels. So you can embody this message to the people. How much I love you. How much I'm willing to forgive. The lengths of my grace have no bounds. Where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. Wow. So for us to say that the man didn't have his love for his wife is insanity and dumb. I should say dumb. I just do that on purpose to say how ignorant it is to think that the man had some kind of doofus mentality when he did what he did, partaking of sin. No. If you do that, you are missing the point of what it speaks to and what Christ did for us. Love, endearment, restoration, out in view, a future lineage, a future thought in view of the net result of the redemption for us. So all that being said, we get to Noah. And in Noah's day, he says he pitched the ark on the outside and on the inside. But people don't understand that. Some people say, oh, well, the word kafar means atone. I know it does. And the word pitch there was like the oil they had back in the day. It's like that's where the Middle East has their oil from. It talks about that. Yeah, I understand. But the reality is, what's interesting about this kafar, this word for atone, is he pitched it on the outside and on the inside. So what does that mean? Because you enter in faith in Christ. But is that where you stop? You have to live out of faith. And the righteous will live by faith. In the actual Galatians passage, it's out of faith. So you live in faith, believing God's word is true and who he is real. But then out of that belief, you apply these things to your life. This is the different distinctions. And this is where, again, Noah then is on the ark for over a year and 10 days, gets off the ark. And we see then that Noah has a 20-year gap between now things happening that aren't so good. And what happens to Noah? He gets drunk. What does this speak to? Does he himself a drunkard? No. He's a righteous man. You say, you're just reading into that because you just don't want to admit the truth. The guy's a drunk. No. Noah and Ezekiel 14:14 is called by God a righteous man, along with Job and Daniel, and that's a long way in the future. God had plenty of people to choose from, and he picked my man Noah. So I'm not going to ever believe that Noah was a drunk. Because if he was a drunkard, then I'm going to say that God must be out to lunch thinking about what he calls righteous. And that ain't true. So I'm going to go with God's view on that and ignore man's view on that. I don't care what man says. Man's a moron. God's a genius. So I'm going to go with what God says. God says Noah's righteous. I'm going to go with that. And so here's Noah, a righteous man. He made a mistake. He's a sinner. He didn't realize the earth's now been changed. God rose the mountains and sunk the valleys, made this earth shape differently. And all of a sudden, the earth that didn't move now began to move on an axis. And all of a sudden, now fermentation comes into view. Seasons come into view. People read this in the Bible, but don't understand that the mountains were birthed post-flood. There was no mountain thousands of feet tall in Noah's day until after the flood. There was no seasons of winter, spring, summer, or fall until after the flood. There was none of that. There was no ways in which we experience a rotation of the earth around the sun and the earth itself rotate. It wasn't like that. We talked about that from 2 Peter chapter 3, the world that then was. And that God calls it the world of his earth, and he talked about how he established it not to be moved. Then he said, well, I did make it to move, and then he's going to make it again that way where it won't. This is why when he does this reset of restoration, Genesis 1, it's the same reason why when Noah gets off the ark, all of a sudden the world is different. What's that speak to? The renovation and the Messianic reign. As soon as the Ark of the Covenant embodied by the person of Jesus, who is the table of showbread, he is the showbread that came down from heaven, the manna, if you will. He is the Aaron's rod that budded as our shepherd. He is the Ten Commandments, the law fulfilled in him. He's all that. So when that Ark of the Covenant embodied in the body of Jesus and the person and the deity of Christ, God the Son, the Messiah, when he comes on this earth, yeah, we're going to have a celebration of a renovation of an earth going on. To which at the end of the millennial reign, he's going to have then a new earth at the end. That'll then be like it was before Noah. This is all because people don't see this. Who talks about that, right? I don't know. I don't know if everybody does. Well, how about you go further on and Noah's... What happened to Noah anyways? People say, oh, he got drunk, and then that's where these people get this sodomite stuff from. They get this justification how they want to demean black people, which disgusts me. They're wrong twice. They want to demean homosexuals for sodomy, which, of course, that's definitely wrong. But then they want to actually demean black folks because of the color of their skin, which that's definitely wrong. It's just dumb. right? Where do they get this from? From that story. And why? Because they misunderstand when it says their father's nakedness. When Leviticus 17 clearly tells you the nakedness of your father is your mother, and your mother's nakedness you shall not despise. Read the book, man. I didn't write that. I'm not that smart. I'm just not. Okay? So, did they sodomize Noah? Did Canaan sodomize Noah? No. He slept with his mother. Why is that? Remember? Wait a minute. Was it Ham's wife, Naamah? Is it Naamah, the hybrid offspring from Cain? Isn't Satan then in her gene pool to allow her to continue to want to proliferate evil? And what a better way to do it than to take the patriarch woman of the new reset earth and bastardize that marriage of the righteous man Noah? It's not cool. But Satan is a diabolical, evil celestial. And what do you think is pulling the strings behind Naamah's reasonings, and why Ham then had this offspring, and why then through Ham's offspring Canaan would not be a good hombre? Of course he's not going to be a good dude. He's going to be a bad guy. And he shows it. That's why God put that story in there. Let us see the seed of Cain alive and well in Naamah through Ham and their offspring. Look what happens. Not good. This same thing is going to happen in the millennial reign, when they're going to have people come up through the millennial reign. You say, well, I don't understand what's important. Why is that important to know what you just said? That doesn't make any sense. In the millennial reign, at the end of the millennial reign, in Revelation 20, verse 9, as the sands of the sea that come against the camp of the saints, where did they come from? Offspring. Offspring of who? Who? Sinners. But who's leading their way? Who do you think is leading the way? The sinners from man, women and men? Or the sinners who were from man and celestial? Who do you think is leading the charge? The latter. Just like it was in Noah's day post-flood. That's why God did that. To show you, nothing is off the table. Nothing is new to me. I want you to see, you humans, how I already understand and ordained this to be this way, to show you in the future. I got my hand on the pulse of this. Whether it was then or whether it's in the future, I got my hand on this. And I want to deal with it. Oh, we did deal with it, didn't we? The Philistines, they're gone. Canaanites, they're gone. Amorites, gone. Hittites, gone. I mean, God, Jebusites, all those people, gone. You know, God just eliminates them off the face of the planet. God just starts using Israel as his battering ram to eliminate all these gene pool of giants. It's just unbelievable, right? So God just keeps on eliminating them. But the seed of Cain continues on, but again, not in the same way, because God eliminated a whole lot of that. And again, because the seed of Cain married into the seed of, which is man and celestial, Satan, married into the man and woman seed. So the more that you have going on, the less and less you see of these giants today. That's why you have less and less accounting of that. People would say, oh my gosh, well, if that's true, you see giants today. No, not in the same way you did back then. Because of the intermarriage. And because of God wiping them off the face of the map. It's kind of a big deal. Just saying. You got intermarriage, and more importantly, God wiping off the face of the map whole gene pools of peoples just that are hybrids. He just, it's pretty, okay? These are things that you see. But is there a resemblance always going to be there? Sure enough it is. And they'll come again back into this propagation of what Matthew 24 talked about as the days of Noah. So shall be in the presence of the parousia of the Son of Man. His presence on the earth in day 7 will be akin to what happened in Noah's day, which is where giants were having hybrid offsprings and taking women by force and having more progeny. It's going to happen. And that days of Noah is a typified aspect of mid-tribulation through the Messianic reign. So we're not going to see the proliferation of giants until that time. You're going to see hybrid offspring walking this earth in the mid-tribulation period. That is a scary thought to think about. But by the way, why is that a shocker? That's when the beast goes, yeah, I'm Satan, so what? You're like, oh my Christ. Okay, that's scary, right? So Satan just comes right out and says, no more covert operations. I'm going to be overt about this. I'm the devil, and I would demand worship. Here's an image that's going to talk, blah, 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 and you're going to worship me, you're going to be put to death. Okay, that's pretty crazy. You know, and by the way, if you want to have commerce of food, water, and shelter, you got to take a mark. So, I mean, goodness gracious. He pretty much is pretty out. So why, and by the way, demons run amok. The 4 angels of the Euphrates are loosed. You know, there's out there with torturing men. They want to die and they can't die. So a part of that is these hybrid offsprings, again, proliferating, propagating the earth. Kind of these, imagine these hybrids walking around. Not just, by the way, pre-flood, they were huge. They were like, 20, 30 plus feet tall people. Like the Greeks called them titans. But that's real stuff back in the day. But post-flood, they probably didn't get as big as that. Maybe they were more in those, 14, 15 foot, maybe 20 foot range at the most. They weren't in those 20 plus ranges because the gene pool kind of gets less and less, right? So the reality is God keeps wiping them out, plus they're intermarrying with humans. And so the reality is that you have this process where God's like, that seed's always alive, but it's going to come back again in mid-tribulation. And that's the reason why it's important to understand what happened with Cain, with Nama, with Ham, with Noah, and Canaan having what he done unto him. Trying to, again, he soiled the marriage to his wife by laying with his grandmother. It's disgusting. And Ham laughed it up to his two brothers. Not funny. Japheth and Shem had respect, and they went in backwards and covered her up. But you see later on, then you have with days of Noah, later on described in the days of Peleg, it says the earth, the continental plates were divided. That's Peleg, what it means. And yet, people always don't have a question about, well, they say this is the evolution and it's a fact, and the earth had the ice age, and that's a fact. No, it's not. Those are both lies. Those are bold-faced lies. It's not true. It's just not. Now, was there a climate change when the Earth's shape was changed? Duh. Yeah. When you have the floodgates of the heaven opened up, and the floodgates of the deep opened up, yeah, that's going to create a change in the climate. Hence, the statement of fact that God made in Genesis 8, the last couple of verses, that there were seasons now of winter, spring, summer, and fall. That's what happened post-flood. So, of course, it was a climate change. So that climate change happened just gradually? No, it was a sudden cataclysmic event. Which is why Brother Todd long ago, he mentioned to me something that was, and I said, it's very true. I used what you said for other people as I were reminded of it and very verified of this, is that over time, if waters and climate change over time, then you have smooth edges of rocks in the Grand Canyon or other areas of where there's big, huge, demonstrative rock formations. But if it's a cataclysmic event, it happens suddenly, you'll have jagged edges because it didn't have the time to smooth out over time from this water just wearing its way through, which is the evidence against evolution when you see the Grand Canyon. They're not all smooth edges, are they? But they don't want to talk about the truth. They want to get this narrative of lies. Yes?
Tracy said, love the Genesis lessons, have to log out, love to all, see you next week.
Okay, love you too. So then we have ongoing, we see now we go back, and then we go back in these Genesis gems, and you see, well, then wait a minute, what's the importance again of seeing how you're saying how the wheat and the tares was a symbolized in typology with Nama getting with Ham, but what's the purpose? How does that bring up mysteries and secrets? Well, because remember where the wheat and darnel come from. The darnel come from the enemy, while the enemy man, Satan, embodied in the bodies of those who were sinful people, marrying into the Jewish people to then produce the tares, or the darnel. Did you see what Nama did? She married into the righteous lineage of Noah. Not to just any person. She married into the lineage of Noah with the man that God called righteous. He was a called out people, his family, and Satan wouldn't have that. So he used his lineage of Cain to the progeny of Nama to get into that line through Ham to then soil the waters. And it worked beautifully in his mind, jerk. But that's the way God already ordained it anyways, right? So the reality is that when Noah had this happen unto him, and we talked about that, and he cursed, then you have again the Peleg and the world, the earth, they're divided. But then all of a sudden, God talks about the Ur of the Chaldees and calling this man called Abram, but yet people overlook the fact that, wait, what about Shem? Well, what about his line? Is he chopped liver? No. Through Shem's line came Melchizedek. Melchizedek became that king priest who Abram would then give tithes and offerings because he gave of all of his wealth and power that was seen. Because by the way, Abraham had wealth because he had tons of herdsmen and cattle that God had given him through attrition, through his call out of the Ur of the Chaldees, interaction with the Pharaoh, his fight against the kings of the plain when he frees Lot, his nephew. And yet the wealth and power of Abraham spoke to the benefits and blessings of us as the one new man in Christ. Well, why is that? Because Abram was a Chaldean, polytheistic person who did not speak Hebrew, who was not a Hebrew. God made him a Hebrew, taught him a Hebrew at the plains of Moreh. He actually taught him. That's what it means, teacher. And so he actually learned that. And so that process of thought brings in that Abraham's wealth and power came from the bequest of God calling him out with no requirement for him to be met as to why God called him, other than God just chose him. And yet, people want to ignore that and talk about free will still. If it wasn't enough with Noah's Ark, if it wasn't enough from the Garden of Eden. So the Garden of Eden, did any of the rocks or dirt cry out and say, please use me to form the first man? No. Didn't happen, right? It just didn't happen. Did Noah cry out and say, no, I want to have me and my family be spared because I know this flood's coming? No. God just said, you. Okay. Did the animals cry out and say, hey, can you choose me as one of the peeps coming on the ark? And how many animals were there on the ark? About 30,000. 2,000 species. So those who go, oh, that would never work. Yes, it would. They were young, virile state of being, so they could procreate. There was dinosaurs on the ark, right? So they were on the ark. And so people want to talk about how that's not true, how it can't be possible, and they look at marine life. That's just a dumb start process right there. There's no reason for marine life to be on the ark because they're in the water. That's just dumb. And as far as the other animals, they could all fit when you start doing the math of their width and length and size, using a younger formation of that. Stop being an idiot and start going, oh, well, the T-Rex and the other and the elephant, when they're weighing, well, when they're adults, of course they're massive. Hello, God's not stupid. He's going to use a younger, virile creation that's going to have more ability to procreate their species and go on. And those who go, well, you can't have a polar bear and a black bear, and I didn't say you could, but that's one species. Those are variations of a species. Again, this is where Darwin gets screwed up. He calls species every variation. And I can go through a litany of examples of this, but the best example I can give to squash that idiocy of thought, all God loved to Darwin, who did believe in Jesus, did believe in God, but got messed up because he was, again, spurned by the Catholic folks of his day that were idiots. And so he decided, I'm going to make my own understanding of what this means. And so hence we have evolution. Another key phrasing, the why, don't spurn people that want to learn. The intelligence and questioning of things is not bad. It's good, as long as you accept God's answer for it. Okay? And that, unfortunately, Darwin got ticked off and distraught because they kept discounting him and insulting him. And so finally he decided to make his own determination. And I can understand that, but it doesn't make it right. It's still wrong. I understand why, but it's wrong. So the point is, he says, well, all these different kinds of bears are different species. No, because are there people in Africa? Yes. How about South America, North America, Asia, Europe? Right? There are, aren't they? Right? Australia? Yeah, right? Okay. So we do have people on these continents, right? Are we all different species? No. We're all Homo sapien. So we are. Well, they don't look like them. That doesn't matter. You're still Homo sapien. So the bears look alike? Polar bears and grizzly bears and black bears? No. They're still one species. Don't be an idiot. Okay? Come on. It's one species. Different variations. That's all. So that means that of one species, that one variation came all the other variations. So the real question should become not how all the species get on the ark, that Darwin list, which makes it a joke. When you look at the species definition, which means that kind of bear, that a bear is a bear, the different variations of bear begs the question, what was the original variation of that bear on the ark? I don't know. Was it a grizzly bear? Was it a black bear, brown bear? Was it a polar bear? I don't know. Whatever that bear was on the ark, from that one type of bear came all of the bears. That's what's up. But folks don't want to believe that because they want to believe in their evolution garbage of lies. Lies, I tell you, lies. Which goes into the whole caveman thing. Lies, I tell you, lies. There's no evidence of any of that stuff. It's all lies. And there are people in Christianity who believe that stuff. No joke, they believe in both. They call it theistic evolution, lies. And it's just lies upon lies upon lies. So the reality is that why is it all important to understand these things? Because without knowing all these details, not only will you not have the premise of understanding God's word is true, but you'll miss the multi-layers I mentioned before. Genesis chapter 1 laid a template that you're supposed to look beyond what God's saying. He's hidden gems in plain sight by saying things but not completing the statements, but letting you know something's here. Something's here. Son, daughter, look into it. Why did he say He created, and all of a sudden it became a void. You're just going to gloss over that. Why would he not use the word create except for 2 other times with the great fish and with the created man, which is the angelic? Why would he then take the first 3 days and not have a sun, moon, and stars, yet call them a day? Why do you just overlook this? Why in Genesis chapter 2 does he say, I rested upon the works I created and made, in verse 3 of chapter 2? But just overlook it. Why in Genesis chapter 3 when Eve said, I should not touch the tree, and that was a sin, then game over? Why does he still talk to her? Why do you overlook that? She wasn't lying. So what does that mean? How about when Cain got his name the way Eve gave it to him? Why would she call him that if she didn't think he was conceived first? But obviously Abel was conceived first when they clothed together as sinless people. Of course they conceived, 100%. Why do you overlook the fact that how things went on later on when Enoch mocked God, which then correlates later on that Enoch was pleasing to God and was taken? Why do you forget the fact that Noah was 100 years working for God, and yet sovereignly that's what he was chosen to do, and sovereignly animal chosen, but the rest of the people were not chosen? And why do you overlook the fact that off the ark he was a righteous man that just got caught into a sinful world and then was taken advantage of by the similitude of what's going to happen with the darnel and the tares? How they are, in the Messianic reign, going to take advantage of people's ignorance and their sinful state, those who come in from the vestige of tribulation, and also other earthy ones are going to come in and not realize that there's a lot to still be on guard for. They're not on guard. That's the principle of that story. Noah was off guard. He let his guard down. But in his defense, the flood just happened. A year and 10 days later, he's finally off the ark. Why would you not think it's over? The reset button's been set. The rainbow's been given in the sky. You just gave a covenant between man and beast in chapter 9. So I get it. So why would you think, have my guard up still? Why would he do that? He let his guard, he relaxed. Because of the environment, because the climate changed. The renovated earth had set forth, just like a Messianic reign. There was going to be renovated. We're going to set forth in a new embarked 1,000-year life. And yet God's telling you that the story of Noah, don't let your guard down. Because as soon as you do, that's what Satan's counting on. Because he knows that you're not believing and understanding, even though he's not there presently. In reality, his influence is there, as he calls it in the Messianic reign, Paneros, like it was through Canaan, as he got it from Ham, who got it from Naaman. Not cool. So Satan's influence was in that lineage, and Noah didn't pay mind to that. That's what happened to Noah. Not a sinful thing. Just let his guard down. He's human. He's human. But you think about also the ark. Did it rain 40 days and 40 nights from the heavens and from the earth? Yes. But it says 150 days, and then the water assuaged, meaning for 110 days after that flood, remember, the boat was just like rocking. What does that represent? That the original onslaught of the original tumult of the days of Noah, mid-tribulation, when the beast comes after for the first month, after the Jewish people, it's going to be hell carnage. 5 million, roughly, Jews will die. Right? Because the death of the flood, people during the flood happened in the first 40 days. Didn't take that long, but the first days of that flood is when all those people died that were on the earth, and the animals. Right? So what's the other 110 days speak to when it says in Genesis 8 that the waters didn't calm until then? That speaks to the latter half of the midpoint of tribulation. The midpoint is going to be a demonstrative carnage of millions of Jews dying, followed by the next part of this remaining horrific time when God's shortening the days. God, thank God, there's going to be still ugliness involved of rocky roads ahead. We'll have the ark was rocking and moving, and that's why I make the joke in Genesis 8 when God says He made a great wind cross over the ark. Really cool, as if to get the smell out the ark, and also to just remind him as a refreshing air of restoration is out ahead. But it didn't take until it was still longer after that. It was still another 200 days after that where they got off the ark. It was a long time before they were able to get disembarked off that ark. And it wasn't on Ararat. That's where the ark rested from its movement. And then it settled on later on even ground, not on some mountaintop. But then we look at all these things and we go back to Abram, and I look at him and I was like, okay, wait a minute. What about Abram? Did God, like I said, did God give him a covenant that was bilateral or unilateral? No, it was unilateral. And that's important to note because I always make comment to this when I do marriage counseling, and we all should know this, but covenants have two things in common. Actually, three things in common. They're a promise from God. Sometimes they're unilateral, sometimes they're bilateral, and they're without blood. That's what they are. So a covenant is a promise from God. It's unilateral or bilateral, and it's without blood. That's what a covenant is. So people say, what's a covenant anyways? I just told you, a covenant is a promise from God. It could be unilateral or bilateral, meaning God could just impute to you a promise without any qualifications or requirements from you. But sometimes he communicates a promise that requires your obedience or your actions, your requirements to be met to experience the promise. But in all cases, a covenant has no blood attached to it. As soon as you see blood attached to the covenant, it becomes a testament. Hence our legal term, your last will and covenant, no, your last will and testament, because when your blood's been shed, your will has now been ratified and it can't be changed. That's why the scripture says, you shall not add or take away from, because Jesus' blood has been shed. His will has been ratified. Do you see? So our Mormon friends and other Jehovah's Witness friends who want to continue to add to God's word, or our prophecy-speaking friends who say that they can continue to add to God's word, no. It's the New Testament and the Old Testament. God's will has been ratified by the shedding of the blood of God the Son. It's done. You cannot add. So stop it. But they do this because they're ignorant, or because they're maliciously doing it for other nefarious reasons. That goes back to the word for covenant. So when God gave Abram a covenant, Abram didn't deserve it, didn't earn it, didn't ask for it, was not required to do anything in return. So that promise God gave Abram in Genesis 12 was a promise that was given as a privilege that would be experienced through all of his lineage, as God calls it, as the dust of the earth. The dust of the earth. God gave him a promise of the dust of the earth, which was a typification of the earthly ones, of those who would enter into the Messianic reign. They're going to be innumerable. So those who would say, hey, to me, I don't understand, when you talk about the Old Testament and Genesis and what it relates to in the future and how it applies to our life, I don't understand those three things. Okay, what are you saying? What's it mean to the future? And why do I have to know that? Well, what God's saying is, dust of the earth is innumerable. Of the earth, it's the lowest level of the three promises. Stars is the heavenly. As the sand of the sea is just a stronger particle. The dust, obviously, the dust is fly with the wind. Sand of the sea is the heirs of the earth. So you got the enterers of the heaven, which become heirs later. The air, which is stars. The heirs of the earth, the sand of the sea. And then you have the actual dust of the earth, which are the earthy ones, those who enter and do not inherit either one. Okay? So when they are referenced as such, his descendants, Abram's descendants, are referenced as such, it's on the heels of him saying, I'll bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you, and through you all the ethnos, all the different ethnicities of the earth will be blessed. So through the faith of Father Abraham, which was a covenant without blood of faith, unlike with Moses, which came much later. So you say, wait. So when was Noah's flood again? Noah's flood was around 3344, if you remember, 3,344 BC. So you're talking about 1,700 years, roughly, 1650, after the Garden of Eden. 600 years later, boom, you have a flood. You're not talking a lot of time between when the man we call Adam dies in 4030, because he lived, 4070. He lived 930 years old. So you count backwards from 5 BC, he lived to 4070 BC. And then it was about 700 and change later, you have the flood. It wasn't long, considering how they lived that long. So in his mind, it's one generation, right? One generation, which is why also when the Earth's climate changed, why people's lifespan didn't last as long as it did then as it does now. But all these things are hidden gems in Genesis. There's so much. If I went through this and did like a chapter and verse exegesis, which I have in the past, but if I did this again right now, I wouldn't be able to get through any of the stuff I just told you. So I'm telling you this now so we can get a thumbnail sketch of, okay, why is it important to understand what you're saying, and what is it that you believe at this place of congregation? What do you believe God says in His Word? What does God say in His Word? And then why is that important to know anyways, based on what's out in the future and what's in our life for now? And I hope that I've been bringing this out for you to see that. That's the point of this time today. So go back to Abraham again. Abram, when God gave him 7 promises, again, 4 were covenants and 3 were testaments. This is on your chart in your book, and the first couple of charts, things like chart 4 or 5. But you look at this, and God told Abraham a covenant that was unilateral, that again did not require any action. What does that speak to? It speaks of the covenant that is imputed and not earned or not experienced by some action. Which is where people say to me, where do you get this of covenant thing and in testament thing when you write that on your chart, or when you say there's a salvation for people from ignorance into the knowledge of who God is? Where do I get it from? God. Where do you not get it from? Why are you so upset that God said that? Did not God isolate and uniquely make a statement that only through this one man and his gene pool will all ethnicities be blessed? Did God not say that? Sure enough, did. He didn't say through this guy's gene pool or that person's gene pool. He said, no, you alone, all ethnic people, all different kinds of ethnicities be blessed through Abram, who was at the time a Chaldean, who then became a Hebrew after that God said that. That's wow to me. That's crazy. So just because I'm related to him, whether I believe or not, doesn't matter. Did God say that? Did God say, I'll bless those that bless you as long as those that are of you believe in me? Is that what he said? Nope. Unilateral, Jack, which spoke to the covenant God gave to the Jewish people, which is why I always say to you that the brephos and nepios of covenant don't have to do anything to be a brephos. You're a brephos because you are, because God says you're of that gene pool of Abraham. Now, a nepios does something with the covenant as a bilateral process and gets circumcised in their heart and in their flesh, their foreskin and their heart, to want to obey the law of Moses under the respecting the covenant of Abraham. That's what they do. But they're still of covenant. Both of them are. Some are bilateral covenant people and some are unilateral covenant people. But God made it clear, you're a covenant people because unilaterally I just said so. Is it not true? Yes, it is. So people say, where do you get this from? From God? That's where I got it from. So then you have later on, when Abraham, again, he then goes and gets Eleazar from the interaction with the Pharaoh. We find later on that he thinks Eleazar is his promised seed. Well, why is this important? Because Eleazar represents the Gentiles. Does he not? He came from Egypt, not of Abram's line. There was no Jewish line at this point. He was just made a Hebrew, for crying out loud. He has no progeny to be called of Hebraic lineage from the past. There is none. So Eleazar represents a Gentile, that which is not of the Hebraic lineage, and yet Abraham loved him as his own, which speaks to how Eleazar is grafted in, just like the Gentiles are grafted into the natural olive tree. Abram was the man that God gave the promises to. Eleazar was not his son, but he adopts him as his own. In such a way, in Genesis 15, he thinks that he's the promised seed. And God's got to tell him, okay, you don't understand. This is when God gives the first testament promise to Abraham, who's then Abram at the time. He says, look, Abram, let me make sure we're clear on this. The dust of the earth issue was a promise, but make sure we're clear on this. That's all your gene pool. So I can get how you might get mixed up with the Eleazar adopting, and now he's like loved by you as your own child. That's great. But my promise to you goes greater than the dust of the sea thing. I just want you to know it's going to go to the stars of the heavens and the sand of the sea. And it's important for you to understand this. I'm going to make a demonstrative covenant with you. I'm going to make some animals get cut in two and walk between them. I'm going to shed blood to make this covenant promise I make to you into a testament. I'm going to bring out a land out ahead to let you know you will be in this place in bondage. You're going to be there for 400 years. But in the fourth generation, you're going to come out and you're going to go to your promised land I'm going to have for you. Because I'm going to tell you what this land looks like. And he starts telling him. And Abraham's like, what? The world? I mean, this is what people don't talk about. So what does that all speak to? The Gentiles are grafted into as a wild offshoot into the natural olive tree. Eleazar. But who was the one that Abram entrusted? When Isaac does come on the scene later on, when Isaac is the promised seed, Isaac is the type of Christ, Isaac is that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's through Isaac ties to Abraham, it then proliferates. Jacob, it then has the 12 tribes of Israel. I get all that. But the reality is, Isaac is that key between the two. And who's the one who chose out a wife for Isaac? Who's the one Abraham sent? Who's the one that Abram gave all of his goods over unto him? Eleazar, his Gentile adopted son. You say, what do you mean his son? He looked at him as his own son. He was circumcised later on. We're going to get to that later. But Abram is called Father Abraham for many reasons, because he did not get involved in this idiocy of physical limitations of blood, not my blood. He loved him as a son, and therefore he treated him as such. He adhered to him as a very endearing, loving father, which is what any father should understand if they are involved in relationships where you have to bring on that role of patriarch parenting as a father figure for those that aren't your own blood. You love them as your own. You get that from Father Abraham. That's what the song should represent in your mind. Then, from that point, you have Abraham later on. He gets this contemplation, of course. He gets in this idea of thinking, even after God told him the promised seed would be a covenant now shed with blood, now becomes a testament. And God just told him about, it's not Eleazar. So Abraham thinks, oh, you just meant he wasn't of my seed. So Abraham thinks, oh, okay, I get it now. I get it. Okay, so I'm going to do is I'm going to take my seed, and I'm going to understand that's correct. So, and I'm going to tell my wife what you just said. And then Sarai at the time tells him, what do you need to do? Okay, so I'm too old. So he's talking about me. So it's obviously your seed, and I'm just two beyond the year. So what you should do, you should get with Hagar, who's from Egypt. We got her too from there. So you should just lay with her and have a kid. What? So what does that speak to? That speaks to the whole process of how the enmity was started between Ishmael and Isaac, Arab and Jew. From that point on, the enmity, it says, war forever. And why was that? Where did it come from? It come from the will of man misunderstanding the will of God. It comes from the impatience of man not waiting on God. It comes from the rationalization of a person. I can't bear kids, so therefore I justified correctly. You can't justify correctly if you're not basing your belief, your decisions on what God has said in His Word. I don't want to hear your garbage about how you think it's right, how it sounds right, how your parents said it's right, how this means it's right. It doesn't matter. If it goes against God's Word, it's wrong. It's wrong. And that's what Sarah didn't understand. Yeah.
Just think, if Abraham hadn't brought Lot with him, maybe he wouldn't have listened to Sarah with the surrogacy. You wonder, because they were childless when they left Ur of the Chaldees, and this was one of his brothers, a nephew of Abraham's. But he almost, however many nieces or nephews he might have had through the other two brothers, it's almost like he regarded Lot as like a son, almost like an heir.
And you brought up.
And he was told not to bring anyone with him.
Yeah. And he brought, speaking of Lot, he's told to bring anyone with him, but he did, which speaks to people's obvious thing in Christianity. They always talk about compassion matters the most. Can care for other people matters the most, more than obeying God. That's not true. It matters, but not more than obeying God. And we see that with Abram, and how to get him into your mentioning. There was strife between Lot and his herdsmen, Abram and their herdsmen. And when he gave Lot the choice, Lot chose the cesspool, and Abram went to the mountains. And we saw what happened from there. Then when Lot took out of Sodom and Gomorrah, and his wife turns back and dies. That's later and we're out ahead. But out of Lot being with them came divisiveness. Out of Lot coming with them came Ammon and Moab, which are the two peoples that came out of his daughters having incest with him. So all that was on the consequence of, to your point, Abram not listening to God, to his point, out of love for his nephew. But he called him a brother later on. So he calls him a brother as if he loved him as a brother. So he loved him in spirit. And so does love and compassion matter more than obeying God? No. Obeying God is first, and then you love and you have compassion. And if that doesn't speak to that, I don't know what does, but you got to understand, these are things that people get wrong in churchianity, but in the kingdom mysteries and secrets, it comes into view too, because then when you have Abram later on just mentioned with Sarai, you could sell Sarai out of the river and say, well, she's an idiot. That's just prove women are dumb. No. It says a prudent man listens to his wife, and it was Sarah, who told, later on, she's Sarah, she tells Abram, Ishmael got to go when he's 13 years old because of what he was doing with Isaac, and then Hagar the same way, giving her the stink eye. They got to go. So Abram didn't want to do that. Sarah had the wisdom to understand, this is not going to end well. Regardless of how we got here, your fault, my fault, is irrelevant to the fact that I still have a say, and I should be heard, and what I'm saying is right, that is based on what God is telling me to tell you, he needs to go. So Another case in point of interesting lesson to be learned. Just because someone makes a mistake, Sarai saying, hey, sleep with Hagar. Abram also made a mistake, saying earlier that Sarah was his sister, and even though he was embellishing the real truth, that was his wife. And then he doesn't really want to admit the fact that, that wasn't the right thing to do after God told him with the Eleazar example. No. The testament was of your genealogy, and so he thought only his seed. And God goes, oh my gosh, I gave you a wife. That your genealogy was imputed, that you should understand what I meant by that. You and your wife. And so he thinks him and Hagar is okay. So don't blame Sarah. He made the final choice. He's the one that lay with Hagar. It's his choice. She can say what she wants to say. He has to make that choice. You can influence him all you want to say, do this, do this, do this. He did the action. He owns that. And he's the one who heard from God. That's not how you do it. It's from your gene pool. And he tried to justify it, saying, oh, my seed. This is all goes back to churchianity and the secrets and mysteries. When you take we take a truth from God's word, you try to fit it to what fits your mindset, look what happens. You see? This is where secrets and mysteries are important to understand, the principles that God's teaching us, and stories like that. They're hidden principles and mysteries that are right there in plain sight if you just look to see them. They are good in understanding why these stories are there. Yes?
Obviously, when Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, he was probably thinking that they were going to be childless, they wouldn't have children. Who was going to be his heir?
Yeah.
He jumped the gun on the Lord. He wasn't counting on a miracle.
No, he wasn't.
But I guess he thought that he wouldn't have anyone to leave anything to.
Yeah, he was just getting ahead of God, like you just mentioned, thinking ahead. I have no heirs. My wife's beyond years. I got to find. That's why he was friendly to Lot, adopted Eleazar, thought about the Ishmael thing after Sarai's recommendation. Thought that made sense. The point comes back to his disposition was wrong. He was in self-justification. He was in a human mindset mode. And secondly, he was in a state of trying to then justify, because of that, how this would make sense to appease God's will, to satisfy the compliance with God's words of promise to him that there would be a seed that would come through. He was trying to rationalize things. And we can do that, by the way. We take scriptures and churchianity, and they rationalize it and say, this is what this means, because they are in a majority of view. And there is some truth to that. So was Abraham's seed in Ishmael? Yes. But was that the seed that God intended, and what he spoke about when he said him and his wife, when he intended the one flesh of Abram at the time and Sarai? No. So churchianity does the same thing. They go, oh, well, this is true. They said this is true. They'll say things about, like, I don't know what they'll say. Something like they'll say, well, this is true that God is not. They'll say things like, God's not willing that any should perish. 1 Peter 1:9. Right? God's not one.